Today is Monday, June 26th, 2023, and we have a couple of days left for the June or first half of this year. And for the past several days, we get a lot of news about the Yegenev, the PMC owner of a company that fights the Ukrainian army on the western part of Moscow, and there was some revolt and exemption from treason by the by Putin and so on. So let's find out what PMC is, and I am trying to read this article to practice English by reading it aloud, and also I will just try to memorize good expressions and words that I can use for my later day conversations or interactions with the foreigners. So here we go. But this article is a bit of big letters, so that it's widespread. I cannot reduce the size. Of course, I can do something, but the font size is so big. Here we go. This one is from warsawinstitute.org, and this article is a special reports dated 20th August 2022. So the date structure is of European style. So this one is probably based in the Warsaw in Poland. The awakening of private military companies. Private military companies, or PMCs, are independent corporations that trade military services through a wide range of opportunities they have due to their corporate nature. Private sector organizations hold military power for a variety of reasons, including shifts in the world order and the security gap for PMCs to fill. Globalization-related phenomena, whether these be linked to new technologies or novel social approaches to warfare, as well as the 1990s privatization trend. Through military force, state actors can accomplish both military and economic goals. By outsourcing combat, they are also able to go ahead with undemocratic feats, while senior state officials or governments might evade responsibility. Undemocratic feats. Private military companies are efficient. This arises from their better readiness to run some missions compared to regular armies. Another factor refers directly to the economy, as actors could mobilize extra resources to boost their capabilities therein. What the privatized military sector offers is in line with both the needs and strategies of leading defense groups or any other firms that hire corporate warriors to shield their foreign investments. With the use of private military companies come strained ties within state actors, while those being politically and economically weak are closely tied to players outside. There is much more room left for illegal missions, as well as those lacking a democratic mandate. In the future, the use of a private military force will expose deeper rifts in society and between states, between the rich and the poor. So could it serve as a catalyst for military involvement, while others leading to conflict escalation and impairing any controlling mechanisms of the executive power? The privatized military industry boasts a huge potential for information warfare campaign, and it could be used by state coalitions to solve their transnational problems comprehensively, whether they touch upon issues like migration, demography, or climate change. What is pivotal for the fate of the privatized military sector will be a vision of the world order as imposed by the US government or the main client of PMCs. Defining private military companies. Private military companies, or PMCs, are independent businesses that trade an array of services pertaining to war and conflict, closely linked to any missions carried out by security forces. Of course, these can mirror tasks of traditional armed forces. They are business organizations that trade in professional services intricately linked to warfare. They are corporate bodies that specialize in the provision of military skills, including combat operation, strategic planning, intelligence, risk assessment, operational support, training, and technical skills. They have grown inherently into the security landscape of many countries, whether these be rich or poor. There is yet a difference between mercenaries or foreign volunteers and private military companies. A mercenary, often referred to as a soldier of fortune, is an individual who takes part in military conflict for plausible personal profit, with a binding contract for an employer and not their homeland. The case of foreign volunteers is somewhat distinct. These are usually guided by ideology, while formally being part of the armed forces, that is, for example, the 13th Khabarovsky Brigade during the Spanish Civil War. The 20th century brought a parallel coexistence of both private military companies and war-related services traded in a somewhat traditional way, as was the case of many, just to quote Raphael Ganowick, Mike Hoare, Bob Donald, or Jan Zumbach. Mercenary activities reached their apex in the 1960s and 1970s, while many colonies worldwide were becoming independent of colonizing countries. However, they continue to this day, albeit to a marginal extent. As for conventional soldiers of fortune, they need to observe a set of strict rules that prevent them from competing with corporate military businesses. Being hired soldiers, they are by no means subject to any corporate structure with no managerial hierarchy, while discipline relies upon the charisma of a leader. As such, mercenaries have no access to any financial markets, which restrains the scope of projects they could possibly engage in, nor do mercenaries build their status in the privatized military industry, full of intertwined interdependencies. Hence, it is a challenge to find a soldier of fortune having a professional and loyal attitude and who displays their long-term pursuits. Private military companies are yet the next stage in the development of military services that burgeons in a parallel with the increase in capabilities of contemporary military corporate businesses. Like any other economic bodies, PMCs benefit largely from their legal corporate structure. Private military firms have a clear-cut internal hierarchy, allowing them to go quickly through decision-making processes and implement new regulations quite efficiently. In its business structure, PMCs have the very same bodies as commercial law companies, including the management board or the supervisory board or shareholders' meetings. With these highly proven business methods, PMCs turn into a durable structure capable of surviving in a competitive free market environment. Another feature that distinguishes private military firms is that they provide services for corporate profit and not that of individuals. Seemingly a nuisance, this yet wholly changes an attitude of the institutional environment toward the company. The mere idea of perks should come in terms of both short and long-term goals, most often described in the form of corporate strategy or at least its vision or mission. Any external bodies are legitimate to assess whether to seek cooperation with an individual PMC through an analysis of its stability and long-term pursuits. Business cooperation with external partners develops on the basis of the long-term business tie, not just a one-off economic event, where a more determined and offensive corporate body takes all the transaction profit. Furthermore, with its status of commercial law body and other entrepreneurs being keen to join, PMCs grasp an opportunity to team with the financial institutions while being able to obtain proceeds from the issue of shares or benefit from trade credits. Also, recruitment possibilities look differently under transparency rules. With greater competition, private military firms can hire better quality employees while expanding their labor pool and welcome more people if needed. Another peculiarity is that PMCs, while operating worldwide in a somewhat unattainable move for earlier private military firms, must observe any formal regulations pertaining to its registration, accounting, or licensing in the country where they operate businesses. This is what differentiates PMCs from soldiers of fortune and any other firms formed to produce profits from colonial possessions. Just to quote here the East India Company, for trade companies, violence itself was not an exchangeable good, but rather a tool for privileged commercial activity. Mercenaries used to offer nothing but just tactical services, yet being unable to handle them worldwide or work for many clients simultaneously. What sparked the boom for PMCs? What came as the first incentive for PMCs to develop its services was an array of structural changes in the economy, with an unprecedented oversupply of retired soldiers and their wider availability and wider privatization efforts as part of the state's economic policy. These phenomena were pivotal for the emergence of corporate military bodies, yet for the sake of its permanent nature, the following are needed. 1. Security gap. The world order has shifted once the Cold War era confrontation ended. In a new order where two mighty powers moved backward toward their borders, a variety of fresh challenges popped up, including failed states, terror groups, or revived spats, as far somehow settled by imperial partners. Each of these never-before-seen stimuli has carved out a sweet spot for PMCs that won a room for maneuver. Carved out a sweet spot. Yeah, it's raining outside, so I'm just closing up the car windows. The world order has shifted once the Cold War era confrontation ended. In a new order where two mighty powers moved backward toward their borders, a variety of fresh challenges popped up, including failed states, terror groups, or revived spats, so far somehow settled by imperial partners. Each of these never before seen stimuli that's plural, stimuli, has carved out a sweet spot for PMCs that want a room for maneuver. In the aftermath of the 1990s reshuffles, a huge number of discharged soldiers appeared on the market, while the vast Cold War stocks offered a great deal of military hardware. PMCs got human resources and relatively cheap and widely available military equipment. The United States has not left the emerging security gap unanswered through privatizing support services for its armed forces, including logistics, security, infrastructure, or IT solutions. Washington propped up its ability to project its armaments might virtually everywhere around the globe. Meanwhile, private military companies built their status on solid foundations, thus stepping up their position on the global market. The U.S. market has morphed into their top host, while their influence stretched worldwide. With the powerlessness of the United Nations, PMCs started getting bolder proposals to step into a variety of new armed conflicts. 2. Globalization and reshuffles in the world economic order. An increase in trade exchange widened chasms between state actors and actors instead of closing them, while the propensity to engage in risky behaviors boosted with a surge in violence in strategically important parts of the world, chiefly Muslim-dominated countries. Private military guards worked to shield mines and related infrastructure, as well as safeguarded large corporate interests and offered training programs to local warlords. With globalization efforts, local state authorities got weaker, eventually relying heavily upon access to foreign-made military hardware in a move that paved the high-tech privatized military industry for further expansion. 3. New ways of warfare. Warfare relies upon a number of technologies, a domain where not all governments have a clear advantage over non-governmental bodies. In spheres like microelectronics, programming, biotechnology, or data acquisition, civilian companies have a great advantage over their military peers, with their employees being far better prepared. A growing importance of both high-tech and financial engineering solutions enable even small companies to run warfare campaigns. Most of the information systems used by the world's armed forces are developed by civilians, mainly for civilian purposes, and make extensive use of the civilian information infrastructure. The Revolution in Military Affairs, or RMA, is a major change in the nature of warfare brought about by the innovative application of new information technologies that create a multiplicative rise in the lethality and mobility in munitions, allow one side to gain an information advantage over another. Furthermore, with the deterrent factor of nuclear technology and continuous news media coverage, warfare loses momentum. This environment is favorable for new combat missions that yet exhibit a great deal of diversity. 4. The privatization revolution. Privatization efforts saw a massive surge globally following the demise of the Soviet Union. Furthermore, after the mere concept of a command economy collapsed, and so did the whole centrally planned system, the market system no longer felt pressure to admit state actors. Meanwhile, the macroeconomic policy of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, sustained fair conditions for exploiting the competitive advantage of the industrialized economies. In consequence, global corporate businesses felt compelled to shield their foreign assets, often by hiring highly specialized private military firms. What are the strategic goals of private military companies? These come in the four following categories. 1. To ensure security outside PMCs accept new combat tasks as they did well in earlier missions and amid the inefficient number of regular forces. 2. To sustain economic growth through a boost to the country's gross domestic product, stabilized growth conditions, and a move towards economic competitiveness through a privileged market position. 3. To accomplish foreign policy goals being other than just access to raw materials. And 4. To evade responsibility, yet this could hardly be referred to as a strategic goal, yet exerts a massive impact on cabinet actions amidst loose control of the state's executive and free democratic elections. Source MiddleEastMonitor.com. They look nice. A particular focus should be on efforts made by decision makers to duck responsibility for their feats. Certainly, this is neither the purpose of the state nor that of the government. It is deficient in the narrative that accompanies energy or defense policy. Their goal is short of a clear-cut definition, yet arises from decision-making processes and political struggle for votes as information spreads very quickly. For ruling elites, this morphs into a matter of their political life or death, though the purpose itself is far from being purely national. Instead, it serves the country's ruling elite, and what is decision making morphs into a ruling elite, while the nation itself follows brief media coverage, usually void of in-depth inquiry. Private military companies and their effectiveness. There are two top reasons for PMCs' efficiency outside, waged in the general new media on the eyes of humans worldwide who can watch live news coverage. New wars have become an arena for private military firms. Waged in the general new media, these could perform greatly as an extra business body to provide external security measures with new warfare objectives. Media potential to depict the conflict is a chronicity. Efforts to save military personnel in fight, societal control, occupation campaigns, and their specificity, information acquisition, and any tasks related to new civilian institutions. In the context of new warfare, the use of a private military force allows shifting the economy from civilian to military purposes, albeit without any harm to the former. thus somewhat raising the production capacity curve for the whole economy. With the engagement of the privatized military industry, there emerges likelihood to gather extra funds while not reducing the workforce by calling reservists to the colors. 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 That's good expression. Likewise, the state is capable of boosting its military strength while keeping its economy and citizens' lifestyle intact. The use of private military force expresses both expansion and dominance of the defense sector in the world's highly industrialized states, mostly in the United States, whose advanced high-tech products require experts who would execute, operate, and manage them. Private military firms cover business investments and uphold beleaguered local regimes by offering attractive investment conditions and seeking to strengthen their security. They offer access to a cheap labor pool while creating a ready market, thus a home for highly industrialized economies to sustain and increase the rate of return on investments. Cost reduction is yet another source of efficiency, while PMC have an open door to both raw materials and new markets. When leaving their footprint elsewhere to shield regular armies, such firms as Halliburton or KBR expand infrastructure, including military facilities, transport lanes, airfields, and set up a vast network of subcontractors and other persons within contracting authorities. In the long run, costs will be cut with assets used for civilian purposes, the expenditure reimbursed through military contracts. Source: KBR headquarters and sources: Wikimedia.com. Foreign policy goals are being implemented through an array of classified missions to prevent anybody from linking states or governments with their outcomes in particular. Yet, not always did special services offer such a warranty. Thus, private military firms have become an excellent tool in the hands of states that cannot combine their missions with state interests, whose senior officials can distance themselves from any activities on the way, even at the cost of military and managing personnel. The more widespread are private military companies, the more widespread are private military companies, the more effectively states could engage them in any activities that could damage state interests. Last but not least, by outsourcing military missions, top officials are able to evade any responsibility through tasks that they do not quite believe to reflect the state's core interests, yet they could lack a democratic mandate. Ruling elites do have recourse to services offered by the privatized military industry. Do they adequately shirk responsibility? Yes, as was the case of PMC's missions in Colombia, arms embargo violations in Bosnia, or a breach of an international trade embargo with China. Either somebody else is burdened with the whole responsibility or events remain top secret. Wikimedia.com. Negative effects of private military companies. With a privileged private military firm, it is possible to eliminate any shortcomings through contractual provisions by carefully picking a military service provider or devising a development plan for the armed forces, or via some liability regulations that also govern the scope of democratic supervision. Others, however, emerge freely of any government-linked actions, or it is not in the interest of policymakers to combat them anyhow. These include one destabilizing effect on international ties. As Henry Kissinger, a top U.S. diplomat, puts it, these rely upon a rivalry between the civilization centers, with one being keen to dominate another, whereas there is no will to refrain one's missions. Quite the opposite. The race is on the way to construct the most effective armed forces in a fairly dynamic world. In such circumstances, there are no reasons to curtail the stabilizing role of private military companies, as this would require both international deals and adequate tools to execute them. 2. Weak state dependence. With no clear-cut and far-sighted visions of the world order, nor are there any bodies and international institutions that could bring peace to the world's outer edges, or sacrifice their people's lives to salvage other populations. A reverse trend is on the rise, with the US, British, or Australian governments assigning such missions to specialized private military companies. 3. Possible legal operations. Yet, in this case, it is difficult to find veritable data. Some investigative journalists claim that this possibility is both theoretical and practical. No government will voluntarily give in without a global agreement. 4. The international community either tolerates or cannot find a way to enhance security in so-called failed states: Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Mali, Sudan, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, and Somalia. Nigeria, Mali, Sudan, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, and Somalia, often plunged in decades-long civil wars or unable to seize control of its whole territory, and with entirely criminalized economies, their private military companies can benefit from the general turmoil. The market economy, where PMCs play an active role, has no respect for political boundaries, and insofar as there is a fertile ground for private military missions, the industry will seek to grab its chance. Governments, whether these be democratic or authoritarian, purposefully utilize PMCs as tools for foreign or internal policies, or in the context of economic phenomena for a variety of reasons, simplify decision-making processes to involve militarily, a kind of a substitute for the economy, distancing oneself from their missions worldwide and the private like economic effectiveness. As long as the tool is helpful, how it is employed could bring out an array of side effects.
예. 네.